Welcome to Radio 5G with Michael Henry Dunn, Nancy Hopkins, and friends, a cosmic reality radio production.
When all the broken-hearted people living in the world agree, there will be an answer, let it be. For though they may be parted, there is still a chance that they will see. There will be an answer, let it be. Or let it be.
Welcome to Radio 5G. It is September 9th, 2020. My name is Nancy Hopkins, and Michael Henry Dunn will be with me in the second hour. For the first hour, we are going to play an hour of recording that we actually played for the first time yesterday. But it's about 5G. It's about... we're going to play it. You're going to like it, and here we go.
Greetings, everyone. This is Bobby Vaughn Jr. with a call to actions. Today is podcast episode number 18. And we are with an individual known as Mr. Scott. He's worked in the telecom industry for a very long time. He is currently working on installing 5G arrays, the 5G networks, and he is also a truth seeker, and because of his truth seeking, he will be giving us key details and inside information on how 5G actually works and what the frequencies are, etc., etc. Mr. Scott, as I'll call you Mr. Scott, but I'll be calling you Scott. Thank you for being here, and I'm looking forward to this. How's it going?
Not too bad. Beautiful day in my area. Good time for this kind of discussions.
Yeah. So I don't watch TV too much, but you don't have to watch TV necessarily to see that the 5G industry is really at its, I'd say, it has been birthed right now. It's no longer an embryo in the womb. It's real. It's happening. It's giving off electromagnetic frequencies. Though starting from the very beginning, I'd say how did you get into the 5G industry, and what do you know about the frequency bands that it's working on?
How did I get into it? Well, I guess it started off when I got into the telecom industry over 20 years ago. Started off actually back in the days of the very first generation. And I was working on some of the systems on the first generation telecom, and I've seen it grow through the entire industry, 2G, 3G, 4G, and now with the start off of what we are now calling the 5G technology. Now, 5G, there's a whole lot of misinformation and myth about it. Some of it true, some of it totally not true. So being hands-on, seeing it grow gives a very different perspective.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I've seen frequencies in the range of 2.4 gigahertz up to how high does the frequency go?
In North America, the highest frequencies that I know of, there is very, very few that are in the 39 gigahertz. 28 is the highest, most common, the 28 gigahertz frequency. And it's all actually easy to be found if you know the links to Wikipedia. They actually publish all this stuff there. I'll send you the link later. But to gain coverage, the project I'm working on claims to be the biggest carrier in the country. And by doing so, they're misleading the public. They're misleading it because some 5G really isn't 5G at all. It's what we call aggregated frequencies. Aggregated frequencies is when they take all the existing frequencies and intermingle them so your phone can bounce between whichever frequency has the most available bandwidth on it. Whichever frequency is going to be the fastest, your phone can bounce around to. And they can call that 5G because it changes your speeds. And it's totally not. So how this works, just a little bit of the physical background to it. At every cell site and everyone's phones, your phones work on average of 3 to 6 different bands. And all these bands that are broadcast from the site come down into the shelter at the base of the tower, monopole, building, whatever it is. And there's a baseband unit where all the basebands, all the frequency bands go into basically collected into the pipe that can go out as a fiber optic signal, transmit or receive from the site before it goes to the antennas. If they interlink all the baseband units, so the phone can then bounce around to whatever the easiest frequency is, they're claiming it to be 5G through DASS, distributed spectrum sharing. So some of this, AT&T uses it actually. In June they started doing this. They also use the N5 frequency. N, by the way, N stands for 5G in bands. There's many, many different bands of frequencies, but the N band starts from N1 all the way up to N95 worldwide frequencies. And then there's some higher ones, N257, N258, and all that. In your chat window, you'll see the link in there. So when they do this, the distributed spectrum sharing, they can claim 5G, but it actually isn't at all. The most common one is the 3500 megahertz frequency, which you can actually tell on any job site, my lingo, any tower or monopole, because physically the antenna is different for anything above 3000 megahertz. It looks visibly different. Anything below 3000, the 2.5, 2.3, 600 band, 850 band, they all can be linked right into the existing cell sites, so you won't know the difference, and it can be theoretically broadcasting 5G at a very low band, same as all the other frequencies are.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've not heard necessarily of the aggregated frequencies. I have heard of phones attempting to tap into the most reliable connection, or even sometimes you can add or say combine say a certain frequency with another frequency to get the best connection. But I think that's something that's interesting to know, is the claim that 5G, and one thing that people need to know is 5G is not 5 gigahertz, it's 5th generation.
Thank you. That's a big difference. Yeah. People get far too often. I was talking to someone else earlier today on that, and there's a Safe Coalition for Children or something like this, and they're talking about the 5 gigahertz, but it's not. It's a 5th generation. It is a thing. It is a group of frequencies that creates a technology. So being that 3500 is the most common, 2500 is one of the next ones. In the US, very few people actually use the 3500. The 2.5 is used by T-Mobile, and the 28 gigahertz is used by Verizon and T-Mobile. C-Spire, I guess they're one of these as well.
28 gigahertz, that just seems like a lot of electromagnetic frequencies. especially when just holding it up to your head, because most people hold their phone up to their head, and you're hitting a cellular antenna that's giving off these amount of frequencies. Historically, electromagnetic radiation's been studied, and it's been shown to cause cancer-like symptoms in exposed cells. So how strong is the 5th generation 5G as compared to 4G?
Well, a lot of this is kind of hard to tell because with the aggregated frequencies and with the spectrum sharing, it fluctuates a lot depending on number of users, population density, elevation of the antenna, and going into what you're talking about, the 28 gig. The 28 gigahertz is interesting because the higher the frequency, the shorter the distance of transmission. Except if you need to get, if your target has a different kind of footprint. One of them I'm working on right now is at a sports area, a large sporting event area. And we're putting up all 5G bands on this one site. And the 28 gig, we actually can't get because they're not even, the units aren't even available anymore. They've been rolled out where they can be, and we're waiting on the order of new pieces, new hardware to come in. But if they're going to go any distance, like a quarter mile, there's two ways to do it. Or a half mile. You have to put in multiple antennas, or you can raise the power level to the capacity of the antenna, the max capacity of the antenna. In that case, we have to consider the height of the antenna versus where the human bodies would be. What is the density at the closest area, and what is the gain of the antenna to make a measurable power level? A lot of factors going into it, but from my personal testing, I don't want to be in close range in front of them when they're on, and I won't let my workers do that either, because near field and far field, when workers are there working near it, they would be right closer to the antennas in the near field range. And to understand that first before we go into the next, it's like, say if you have sound waves from a speaker, when you're too close to it, you might just hear a buzz. When you're a far distance away, you can actually hear the sound of the music. In this case here, the antenna can't even create the waveform until it has left the antenna. It is, say, a meter away or so before the waveform actually starts to begin to form. And as it broadcasts out, it forms a clear waveform for everything to pick up. So when you're within 3 to 6 feet of the antenna, you're within near field, and it is pure energy. That's the hot zone. Nobody can get to that. And if you do, you don't want to be there.
Oh.
Measuring out further into the waveform, within the first reasonable signal level, which is all measurable, it's just different. There's a lot of factors to calculate out to figure frequency power levels.
When installing these on places where the public would congregate, or where there would be a group of people, is there a safe zone, and is the public generally informed on that safe zone?
Yes and no. For the frequencies below the 3.5, whether it's 3G, 4G, 5G up to the 2.5 range, there's a rule of thumb. This goes to the RF engineering. The rule of thumb is basically 6 feet up and 6 feet out if you were to draw an imaginary box below an antenna, 6 feet high and 6 feet out, wherever this box is below the antenna, at a 45-degree angle broadcast coming down from the antenna, that it cannot reach within this imaginary box, which means the antenna has to be 12 feet off the ground or more, because if there's a 45-degree signal coming off of that, it works out to be approximately that. Again, it has to be measured. If it is anything below that factor, signs are put up. On rooftops, which lots of rooftops, we have installed hundreds of signs on the back of antennas. And there's multiple different signs that goes on there. Danger, high frequency zone, 1 meter setback, 2 meter setback. Even on doors of rooftops, when you get to the top of the building, there's a door or a sign on the door before you leave the building, warning of radio frequencies in the area. Even if all the signs are up there, the servicemen who go up, air conditioning people, roofers, spectators to go watch fireworks, they have to be aware of these things, and that's why we're supposed to be putting signs up. Although I've heard of some places there's not near enough effort being put in to warning the public about these RF levels.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, that reminds me of when we lived in California. There was a church that, of course, because it's a church and it has to keep its roof over the people's head, right? The way that they made money was they rented space for a couple of cell towers disguised as other things. One of those disguises was a pine tree. It was a cell tower actually disguised as a pine tree, and the other was built in to what looked like a drainage system connected to the roof, kind of looked like a gutter kind of system. And with that, necessarily, we didn't see any notifications that they were even there. I mean, of course, we've seen the base station, I guess that's what you'd call it, saying that, you know, just giving us a little warning of electromagnetic radiation, though most people just driving by or any individual say, we found a homeless person sleeping under the tower one day and told them that they need to probably move on. And we actually wrote up flyers and put them on the church members' cars, letting them know that there are these antennas like near the actual sanctuary. I really doubt the preacher let them know, but we sat down and had an interview just off the record with the preacher, and he claimed when he started preaching at that church, they had to excavate the walls because millions of bees were dead on the inside of the walls by the fake pine trees that were actually cellular antennas. And yeah, I could see definitely what you're talking about with some people, and some companies just don't go to that extra level on informing the public on the dangers, and especially, you know, disguising these towers as other things. Is that common in your area?
Just 10 minutes down the road from where I live, they're actively building what we call a monopine. Instead of a monopole, which is the tall, slender pole that the Telecom antennas are on, they're nicknamed monopines. There's a number of them in my area here. Shrouding, I have about $75,000 of shroud coming in on Wednesday. It's to be a giant false top of a building. There's new technology coming out that's highly reflective. Don't have the name in front of me, but it's actually a very cool product. It is almost like an invisibility film that goes over antennas, pipes, walls. It makes it appear like it's invisible. Shrouding is a very big thing. I sent a crew to a church the other day. They go to the roof, they go into the steeple, and that's where the antennas are kept, inside the steeple, inside crosses, inside automall signs. It's about making it pleasing to the public. If they're hidden away, it's pleasing, and the public never questions anything that they don't see. Oftentimes, shrouding is even only halfway, so the antennas stick above it, but nobody asks what that is. Nobody asks what a part of an antenna is. They don't see all the radio system at the base of the antennas, because now radios, they're all put out right close to the antenna. The radios are no longer in the radio room in the shelter down below. The radios are all up top, RRUs, remote radio units, and they're put at the base of the antennas, but they're all hidden away. And that is very, very common.
Do you have an issue with the shrouding at a certain level? Is there any type of shrouding that you feel is just deceptive, deceiving?
That's an interesting question, because a lot of times it is. There's ones we nickname it China hats. Yes, it's not very appropriate naming, but it's because it's a round cylinder, and on the top it has the hat-looking thing, like on vents, cylinders for venting out fumes of buildings, and it's a very common one put up. The backside of it has a door that opens, and the antennas are all hidden inside there. Driving by on the street, you would just look up and just go, oh, that's something interesting. There are lots of little chimneys up top, and it's all antennas up there. So yeah, that's kind of odd. The reflective film, which hasn't yet been used in my area, but it's definitely been used in the UK a lot, and even in the States, they're starting to use it. And that's something interesting where you can hide stuff in plain sight. In Las Vegas, right across from Treasure Island, there's a huge false top to a building, and it's fabric all the way around. When the sun shines on it just the right way, you can kind of see through it. Yeah, it looks like a part of a building, but it's just hiding all the equipment up there. Disneyland is the same thing. You walk through Disneyland, and no matter where you look, it looks so peaceful. There's not a single antenna around. But you think of the population in there, and you look at everyone on their phones, I'll guarantee you that's one of the hottest places ever when it comes to RF, because of the amount of people who are in there recording, they're transmitting, they're on YouTube, they're on FaceTiming. That signal comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's all hidden within the buildings.
Yeah, and I would guarantee you, in order for Disneyland to keep it so peaceful, there are no warning signs throughout. They're not going to. They would hide an antenna inside of a Goofy statue, right? And say if you knew that antenna was inside of that Goofy statue, you see a guy on his phone leaning up against the statue thinking he's just chilling on his phone. Little does he know he's probably in a really hot electromagnetic radiation zone.
Yeah, there's good chances that there's a lot of hot zones. Well, you can't make it known down there because you can't break the fantasy. Disneyland is all magic and fantasy, and like when I say magic is only there if you don't know the truth behind it. Once you know the truth, magic is no longer magical, and that's exactly what a lot of this is. We work magic stuff all the time when it comes to this. Except for the one myth that's out there. about these things popping up overnight. No, people don't make this stuff happen overnight. You can't go in and pop up a tower or a monopole overnight. There's lots of work and planning going into it, and very rarely do people actually work at night except emergency calls.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm glad you touched on that a little bit, because there are probably some people that are out there thinking, oh, they wait till everybody's asleep and they send a small crew in and pop these things up.
Yeah, I've heard of that, and it kind of makes me laugh, because it's just nowadays logic and reason has slipped people's minds, and they're willing to jump on anything to create their own conspiracy theory. But truth being out there, no, it's too dangerous. This stuff is very dangerous to put up, because you're working at heights. You're working with very delicate equipment, and you have to have light to see that in.
Are there any tests when you guys go up and install these antenna arrays? Are there any frequency tests before it goes live? And I guess playing off of that, if there are any tests, have any tests gone wrong?
Yeah, actually. So if you were to look top down on every site, go aerial view top down, there's 3 sectors to every site. Rule of thumb. Sector 1, 2, and 3. And Sector 1 is usually the first antenna past north, roughly 40 degrees, 180 degrees, and 270 makes the 3 sectors. And when you have multiple frequencies in here, occasionally that can get mixed up, and then sorting it out so the right broadcast in the right direction can be exceptionally challenging. And there's been times we've had crews driving around doing drive testing, and guys up on the tower, guys in the shelter, trying to work things out and sort it out. And it's one of them was on a hospital for children. Imagine that. And it took the longest time to sort it out. That's just karma, if you ask me. Testing of them, we do all kinds of quality tests, fiber optic tests, DC tests, signal level tests, but that's usually not when the people are up there. When the guys are working there, they do all the equipment testing and this before it goes live, and we pull them off once it goes live. So we don't have the guys working up there usually when it's going live. Although I could send you videos of guys working around everything while it's live and changing out the live equipment, and that's always fun. I've had a number of guys, including myself, get some fairly significant RF burns. And my right thumb would, for quite some time, years ago, probably started, got to think back, around 2006 or something like that. 2004, 2006, I got a pretty significant RF burn, and with DC combined. And for the next 10 years, every winter season when your hands get dry, the one spot of the RF burn would get calloused up and break open and bleed, and it would take 3 weeks to a month to heal up. And finally, after probably 10 years of this, it's stopped. Other people have got burns right through the their between the finger and the thumb where you grab a cable. They've gotten burnt on that. Overexposure while it's live. Guys have gotten sick from overexposure, and that's actually not uncommon. But the workers are usually young, vital, healthy, very, very active. So they would be the strongest link in anybody who would be working around these types of equipment. So a lot of times people say, well, workers can't be around that. Well, they are, and they're the best of the best. So if they were to get sick by RF, a random normal person with a a very average immune system or compromised immune system has a much higher chance of getting sick than any of the workers would.
That's great information there. It leads to so many other questions as well. One thing I heard you mention was installing antennas on a children's hospital, which, I mean, that's just one example of course, it's a commercial facility, it's a facility that needs connectivity in order to, keep children healthy. Have you noticed a larger rollout of the 5G antennas during COVID-19, the coronavirus? And have you seen it more on hospitals than you've seen in a long time? Or is that something that's a myth?
Interesting. Okay. First off, the 5G planning has been in effect and been building long since or previous to the COVID-19 became public. Now, I use the wording carefully. Before the COVID-19 became public, because the planning of the COVID-19 also goes way back. So the 5G rollout, has it been coincidental at the same time because the 4G has ran its course and the technology has just grown at a similar coincidental time as COVID did? That I can't really answer because I don't know enough history about both events, the COVID-19 buildup and rollout and the 5G. Now, I know when the 5G started. Basically what it comes down to is, now without opening the can of worms too much, 5G has been in play in planning for years. And it just has come to fruition and it's been rolled out recently, starting in China, starting in Europe, coming to the US and Canada, more and more. As far as on hospitals and that, I wouldn't say it's been on hospitals any more than any other buildings, because what they do is go to where the population density is. That's where the money is. Remember? Always follow the money. So wherever the population density is, this is where the money is. So whether it's New York, Dallas, LA, the downtown area where there's the greatest population is where the first rollout should be played out as a business sense. And if you think about it as a business, that's the best choice. In the places where there's high population density, there is also hospitals. There is also many other high-rise buildings. So if you were to select a certain other building, say a stadium, has it been rolled out in stadiums more? The answer also would be yes, because that's also where lots of people congregate. Hospitals, stadiums, so I would say yes, in that case, it's a myth. But on the note of hospitals, there is something new that's been happening in the last 3 years, I think. DAS, Distributed Antenna Systems. Now, DAS, the interesting thing about that is in courthouses, hospitals, any other large buildings like this, and it's even similar in hotels, but they use Wi-Fi. Many other large buildings of this sort uses DAS systems. We've put them in hospitals, we've put them in courthouses, we've put them in malls, shopping malls. Lots of shopping malls have this already. So the interesting thing about that is there's a head-end room, like there's an electrical room, but it's a telco room. All the carriers in that area who partake in this build bring all their fiber optics and their baseband equipment into one room. Then from there, throughout the entire shopping mall. Let me pick on one I know of, Woodfield Mall in Chicago. It's huge. So in there, I don't know the story behind it, but I would expect if I was to plan one there, they would be at one head end room. Because that mall has 3 different levels and multiple different wings, all carriers aren't going to run all their own entire system. So all the carriers put all their signals into one pipe, one coax cables, and run it the length of the mall with dropping off to antennas all the way down through the mall. So in a mall that size, you could have upwards of 75 to 125 small antennas, low power antennas, all within the mall. And each one of those could cross boundaries of all carriers. So that's different.
Yeah. And those antennas throughout the mall, I assume they would be shrouded. There would be no warning sign, probably, right?
They don't even have to, because they're built to look like a fire alarm, a sprinkler head. They're disguised in the way that they're built. If you had a fire alarm in your house, it looks very similar to that, and it's an antenna. It just has a hole that goes through the drywall to the ceiling, where it attaches to the cable and to the trunk system. They're low power, but still, it's just more EMF out there.
Yeah, I agree. And the shrouding, in my opinion, is something that's really interesting. It's something that I actually want to talk more about. As a different from what we've talked about already, the different shrouds. We've already talked about. We know that they're in church steeples. We know they're in crosses. Really doing a disservice, in my opinion, to the Holy Spirit at that point. It's just pure deception. But
I have purposely, before you go on,
yeah.
I have purposely declined jobs because I will not build on a church. I agree. It is absolutely disrespectful, and I have quoted on them, and I've thrown my numbers way high so I would not win the job, because that's just wrong. Simply, it's wrong.
I agree. Completely. Yeah. And so, and also you're saying fire sprinklers, fire alarms. If you can, what are some other just common and uncommon objects that we as the public could look for to where these 5G antennas are being shrouded as? What type of items actually could be 5G antennas out there?
Hold on, I'm just pulling up one of my clients right here, and I'll see if I can pull up a listing of them. Mind you, they make so much stuff, it might be hard for me to find this. Telecommunications.
Yeah, take your time.
So,
yeah, it's all going to be edited anyways. Yeah.
okay, I'm pulling up the brochure on this, and I'm seeing the top of a building that looks like a lighthouse on the side of a barn silo. They're completely painted in to appear like bricks. An entire fault building. You name it. It can take on the shape of almost anything you could think of. Bell towers. I've worked on clock towers, architectural structures, parapets around penthouses, or the top of a building, the parapet, chimneys, even like just a stick off the top of a building that looks like a lightning rod can actually be a whip antenna. So it can take on almost any shape you can dream of.
That's so interesting. And I would assume that certain clients would request certain types of antennas. Say if you're in a region that's known for yachts, or being a harbor, then you could really easily get away with sticking a 5G antenna in, like you said, a little lighthouse, because people are familiar with those lighthouses and they think it's just a normal decoration. Or
what popped into my head right there is a boathouse at the end of a pier, and there's a sail, a architectural design that looks like a structure in a sail, but there's many antennas on it, and nobody even understands what they are. They don't even look at them because it looks like just part of a sailboat.
yeah, we've really opened up a good can here. I appreciate this. That's something that's really really interesting to me, because I like uncovering mysteries, and I can tell, you're an uncoverer, an investigator yourself.
This is for me. I don't know that this is surprising because it's routine for me. This is just part of what I do. So if I'm talking to you and you do find it interesting, definitely let me know.
Mm-hmm. Are there any type of 5G antennas that are installed within people's houses? Or let me say this. In residential apartment complexes, one thing that I've learned over the years is the lower class and the poor are usually targeted and just kind of set off to the side. So within these apartment complexes, what would residents of the apartment complexes look for in order to know that they're actually looking at 5G antennas rather than just some ordinary decoration or part of the building?
That can be difficult because a lot of times these are put in places where people can't access them. Now, when I say that, I'm talking about the general run-of-the-mill people who actually follow rules and do what they're told and don't go in places they're told not to, because there's oftentimes signs, authorized personnel only. That keeps people out. High warning, high voltage. That's an easy one that keeps people out. And they don't go there because there's a sign that says don't go there. Shrouding. Obviously, if they're shrouding there for a reason. If the building randomly changes and they're not sure why it changes, it might be of interest. Outside of that, the 3.5 antenna and anything higher like the 28 gig antenna really requires a proper line of sight. That means it has to be visible from the antenna to the receiver. The people who receive it has to be a clear line of sight. So if you're on the ground and you're receiving the signal, you have to be able to see the antenna. Key point. The 3.5, the 28 gig, and around there, they appear different. It is very square boxy, and this is Ericsson and Nokia and Huawei, and all the ones are the same here. They're very square boxy, and they're much fatter, thicker. And the way to tell that this is the true 5G, the bottom of the antenna does not have the series of black cables coming off of it. Panel antennas usually have 12 black cables coming off the bottom of the antenna. Those are the coax cables that carry the RF signal into it. Whereas the 5G antenna, 3.5 and greater, the radio is built into the antenna in one single box. So the only cables going into it is a power cable and fiber optic cables. All the action happens inside of it after that point. So that is a visible telltale sign that is different than all the regular run-of-the-mill lower frequency stuff.
What type of applications would the lower frequencies be used for? And then the 28 gigahertz, why would someone want to use 28 gigahertz antennas? And can you change the frequency on these things?
Good question. One, lower frequencies are much more useful in lower density areas, lower population areas, because the 600 is a common 5G signal now. And because it's a lower frequency, the wave is much larger, it travels further. So when you have one cell site, you don't necessarily need more cell sites within the next 3 miles, 5 miles, all the way around it, because it has a big footprint. The lower population means you're not going to have the same number of users on it. You get a much broader coverage for a less dollar value. So it's really easy and much cheaper to put in the 600 band, the 2.5 band. Some people use the 850 band, and they just change the cabling system inside the baseband unit to make it operate on 5G. And it's actually pretty simple to set it up that way. So you get a longer signal, a lower density of people, and you still get the capacity of those people. Now, when you go to a high density area, a football stadium, a shopping mall area, a place where there's, believe it or not, major intersections where lots and lots of people travel through a really populated area, that's where the high frequencies come in, 3.5 and greater, because you get a much, much, much larger capacity of users on the high frequency. So if you had 3 antennas of the 28 gig, you could probably get 300-400 users all on at the same time. And when you think of it, that's actually quite a few people in a simple area. Sometimes you might even get more than that, depending on how it's wired in. The number of them, usually they don't even put that many. Now there's something we haven't even touched on yet.
Yes, sir.
Similar frequencies, but it's called massive multi-MIMO. It looks the same, but internally it is completely different. It's the same boxy type antenna, like the 3.5 antenna, except inside of it, it has the equivalent of 64 antennas in one. And with that, if you think of it as an entire grid, you can power up some and less on others, and you can change the beam to follow a user. Beam forming, beam tracking. And that way, if you have truckers who are driving down the road, it can track the truck from the left side to the right side of the footprint of the antenna and give that trucker 100% high capacity the entire way. If there's a, here's the interesting thing to bring up. If there's a riot, like we've seen lots of riots lately, and lots and lots and lots of people are congregated in one area, the carrier can have beam tracking and beam forming and follow all those users at once and allow them all signal. On top of that, and this is what boggles my mind, why this technology is not being used for our safety and our benefit. 4G, LTE, 5G, and everything to do with all these signals now are going all data. The UMTS, the previous legacy frequencies of voice calls, they were not data. That was a legacy stuff where it could not be stored near as easy as data can. We're all on computers. We all have computers. We all see a program, you save a program. Like this call is being recorded in a data format. You're not using an old school cassette. Imagine how many cassettes you'd have to have. Being it's in data, they can track all the calls, all the pictures, all the videos. All of this stuff can be tracked and stored. actually in Utah, there's a center that is so freaking large, it is like an entire city of its own, and is considered data warehousing. In the data warehousing, like any computer system, whenever there's any kind of failures, it has to be immediately rectified. It is tracked in a three-dimensional format, and people go on segways cruising through the warehouse, driving for almost a mile to get to it sometimes, to find where the trouble is, because they store that vast amount of data. I don't even know what it's measured in. And everything we say, everything we do can be tracked and recorded.
Yeah, you're talking about data transmissions that are on a millimeter type of scale, microwave, and that's something that we haven't talked about is the new 5G actually being on a microwave scale, millimeter wave scale, and like you said, one thing I want to talk about just quickly, we got about 10 more minutes left, is the effects of microwaves on people. Have you personally noticed more work-related injuries since your team has started rolling out 5G as opposed to the latter years of Telecom?
I wouldn't say a whole lot more. So as far as the 5G goes and the more frequent injuries and responses from the field, not enough of the high frequency. We actually haven't worked on enough of the high frequency to note that. But as far as testing goes, I've personally gone out there and I've personally tested it. And I will say that the RF meters do go off a lot faster with the new 5G frequencies. That I will say. I have personally experienced overexposure far too many times to count. And now I don't even go to the cell site if I can help it, because I am affected so fast that I've become very electrosensitive towards it. Can it have effects? Absolutely, it can. But who is selected to get cancer? We don't know. I don't know if it's in the genetics of the person to get cancer. I don't know if it's in the genetics that a person can get asthma, or if it's something that just happens. The same thing with the electromagnetic sensitivity. Each body is created differently. And so you may feel it before I do. I may feel it before you do. But in general, the number of frequencies, the amount of radiation is ever increasing. And there is one thing I did notice, and I've been monitoring this, and anyone who actually starts putting the dots together, look at what's going on in the world right now. Look at the attitude of everybody. Look at the rioting, the chaos. What's happened in the last few years? More rollouts, more craziness. And if you leave the city, go into a complete and utter dead zone for telecom for a few days, turn around, come back into the city. I will guarantee you will feel the difference. You will feel it physically and mentally.
It's a great point, because originally some of these frequencies that we were talking about were used for riot control or crowd dispersal, and now they're being integrated into the new cellular antenna networks. So what are we seeing? Connecting your dots, we're seeing, I'm not going to use the word anarchy because my definition of anarchy is a little different than what the news portrays it as, and I'm not going to go into that. But we're seeing I would say what equates to a really irritated society, an irritated nervous system, and you're seeing it on a social level, and it makes me think about the correlation between all of this and the rollout of these new frequencies.
I would like to argue that, but I have a hard time. I can't really argue that because I can't pinpoint and say Portland has had X number of cell sites put in. I can't put a fact to it, but I do know that it has been rolled out in many places, including these cities, and also at the same time, this is where riots are happening. If you put two and two together, it is plausible that the nervous system is being irritated. We know for a fact that social media is being manipulated on a regular basis. The censorship is just ridiculous. So if you look at if there's that much control over censorship, that much control over media content, who says they're not also the same control over what actually broadcasts the media? I don't know. But it's a question that's definitely worth looking into deeper, because if that's what actually puts out the social media and allows it to be broadcast.
Yep. And anyways, with all that said, there are some ways we can heal ourselves from the effects of electromagnetic radiation and all types of pollutants and radiation from our body. And something that I was looking at earlier was how we can provide these solutions. We can know the information, which is extremely important, on what the issues are, the ethics, and have a discussion around it. I think ultimately we need to provide some solutions, and I'd say first, avoiding it as much as possible if you can get around the cloaked. What's the word you used as the cloaked one? Shrouded.
Shrouded. Yeah.
If you know how to get around and see these shrouded antennas, get around them. But I just want to provide a few solutions that I was able to research earlier. And these are herbal solutions, plant-based solutions. Antioxidants are, in my opinion, the number one solution. What antioxidants do is they seek out and destroy free radicals in the body, and also they repair damaged cells. And the number one herbal solution for this is something that's known as dragon's blood. It comes from a plant that grows in South America. It's a red sap off of a tree, and it contains the highest antioxidant levels of any herb or plant that grows on this planet. And also astaxanthin, which is spelled really weird. Clove oil is also an herb that's really high in antioxidants. Clove, CoQ10, zinc, broccoli seed extract, and vitamin E. But if I had to make one recommendation, I would say dragon's blood. There's a certain measurement of antioxidant levels. It's called the ORAC or ORAC, oxygen radical absorbency capacity, and tested. There were hundreds, thousands of plants and foods that were tested for their antioxidant activity, and dragon's blood came in number one. And just as an example of how powerful it is dragon's blood and astaxanthin ranked over 2 million ORAC and cranberries were only 9,090.
Oh, wow.
And people say eat your cranberries, drink your cranberry juice because you need your antioxidants, but people forget about dragon's blood and astaxanthin. And I say one of the most common ones is clove. Clove is a really good antioxidant, high on the antioxidant level, antimicrobial and antibacterial. And oregano oil, which is, to go into another story, an antiviral, kills superviruses. So anyone looking out, dragon's blood, astaxanthin, clove, and oregano, looking for a way to fight the effects of these frequencies. Of course, zinc as well. But anyways, we're going to wrap this up here. Mr. Scott, thanks for being on today.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Look forward to our next time talking. Next time, we might be talking about 6G.
We only hit the tip of the iceberg. This discussion can go on for hours as it is so deep. There is so much to it. Definitely we can chat on this again and how it plays into the rest of everything that's going on in the world.
Yep.
Okay, then. So what'd you think?
Wow. Well, I mean, a lot of it was just a bit over my head technically, and I was trying to, picture it all. I mean, the shrouding and the to me, that's. Are we on the air?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because I remember in our early days of looking at the problem and looking at the question of how bad it could get and what could we do and what if all, civil and legal actions were ultimately ineffective in stopping the rollout, which kind of seems to be the case. What if it came to a matter of life and death and defending your family, what actions were people likely to start looking at taking just to prevent effective 5G from hitting them where they live? And so the whole question, the apparently obvious fact that they're hiding it would argue, well, if it's harmless, why are you hiding it? And if they're hiding it this effectively, I mean, like the guy was saying, well, hey, most people are law-abiding citizens, and, if it says authorized personnel do not enter or high voltage do not enter, you don't even need to disguise it as, I don't know, a hairdryer or whatever the heck they're doing. But it also begs the question of, I mean, I immediately went to Ultimate's solution, being the son of a holistic pediatrician looking for root causes, right? So, well, I went to frequency and vibration. And to some of the stories you shared, Nancy, about Walt and you and Shungite field and how it works with us creatively. And I'm recalling that story about the satellite grid and an antenna on a rooftop where you could, send a frequency back up and disable a whole satellite grid if that was your intention. Not saying that we do that here on Radio 5G, being law-abiding, peaceful, nonviolent citizens. Anyway, this is kind of where my thoughts were going with this in terms of if it comes to people looking at more militant solutions and not necessarily advocating that, but the funny thing about this guy was that he was, so helpful and forthcoming, and obviously with detailed knowledge of what's being rolled out where and how it affects, what frequency is effective and how many homes and how many, there's all this great technical information, but in terms of what we've looked at, in terms of 5G's devastating environmental impact, human health impact, weapon system, control system, surveillance system. This was, not really so much in the field with him. I mean, it seemed as if that body of knowledge is not something. I mean, he's sufficiently aware of its harmfulness to be, willing to come forward as a whistleblower. But I'm just wondering here in the midst of the whole virus situation, with this being rolled out covertly without pause and probably accelerated, in the big strategic picture, I'm appealing to your military strategic sense here. In the big strategic picture of everything rolling out, in the world right now, what are you sensing? I mean, obviously, it's the quantum solutions, the vibrational solutions. We keep our hearts high amidst all this, and then there's the practical stuff too. It's strategic, geopolitical, a vibrational action. So, in the big strategic picture, mon général, as the little French guy in Hogan's Heroes used to say, what's your sense?
In the strategic standpoint, well, okay, it's to look at this is you got to look at a three-dimensional playing board. You've got people like him, okay, that are actually building this stuff. Who he's odd in that he really is looking at it. A lot of them, they don't even want to look at it. It's my job. I do it. I put these wires here. I do this, and But he's looking at the whole system actually, and saying, "What exactly are we doing?" Now, he is a whistleblower, but he's still working in the same thing. But he's working it and doing it because he needs the job, and because they're talking electromagnetic sensitivity, damage from the electromagnetic aspects of, in quotes, 5G, because as he explains in the beginning, 5G is not just a fifth generation. I mean, fifth generation means that you've taken the same basic technology and improved on it, like they went from 2, 3, 4. But with 5G, it is an all-encompassing term for a whole bunch of crap. And he's not looking at the rest of the crap, which I think is what you're referencing. The ability to do surveillance, the ability to... now, he touches on it when he's talking about, can he with authority talk about 5G is actually causing nervous irritation that's causing people to be more susceptible to going out of their crazy minds and rioting. He doesn't say that, but he's looking at it because he knows, like the rest of us knew, where this COVID thing broke out is where you got a lot of 5G, or we use the word densification. He used the word aggregated. Same situation. You're putting more of the same thing into something. So again, the electromagnetic damage done by aggravated or what the aggregated. Let's just say when you got more, it's more dangerous. There's more of it. You aren't not going to drown in a glass of water, but you'll drown in a lake. It's the same sort of thing. It's just more of it. When we're talking about surveillance and the ability to be able to not just irritate a body, but to actually interfere with the mind, not only do you irritate the nervous system, but you're putting thoughts in their minds. He can't go there yet.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, so he's at a bottom layer and a layer above the bottom in that he's looking at it and he's seeing the dangers of electromagnetic energy, because obviously he's talking about areas where you don't go in, because you're going to die if you stay there very often, a long enough time. And the signs that they have to put up. The telecommunications environment accepts that there are dangers. Yes, you can burn up from electromagnetic energy, but it's got to be high and it's got to be certain place, and we put up signs to keep you away from it. What they're not looking at is the lower power of these things doing slower damage, just like in a microwave. Microwave cooks like really fast. Well, if you're in the microwave, oven, yes. But if you're standing next to a microwave oven that's leaking microwaves into your environment, it's going to kill you. It's just going to kill you slower. Like cooking meat in an oven.
Right.
So you got his layer. Then you've got the layer of people that are actually let's go to the top layer. The layer that understands that they are trying to control and surveil and manipulate. Okay? All of that stuff is the average technician is not going to see that, because that's inside what they're putting in. It's like the light bulbs. I mean the street lamps. The guy's on top of the street lamp putting this system in like he's been told to do, and to him it's a light system. To Mark Steele, you got an antenna system in there. Did that man understand at all what he was talking about? Probably not.
Yeah, he had no idea what he threw.
No.
Threw that component at his head. Get out of here! And he said, "Oh, thank you. You've just revealed to me the inner workings of a device that you are installing in complete ignorance of what it is you're doing."
And he doesn't make the connection to the COVID. He was talking about the riots that are occurring. But when you look at the overall scheme of things, again, there is something to the connection to 5G. There's no way. I mean, a logical person is going to look at the database. It all happened where there was a lot of 5G. They're telling us that 5G is going to give you the symptoms of the virus. What's happening? It's like we still don't know what's happening because there's so much lies and deceit. You remember? I just want to say this. Remember when we had those the doctors that went out and they did a press conference in front of one of the big, I think it was the Supreme Court, and within an hour they were taken down? You remember those people? Another group of doctors has done the same thing about a week ago now. And same thing happened. They got taken down. So there is massive censorship occurring. Never mind the fact that your normal press people aren't talking about any of this. But there's massive trying to shut us down. So the more they push, the more they squeeze. Well, why did they take that down if you think there's nothing wrong with 5G? Why do they keep taking all this stuff down? Because, why? If it's not, it's lies and, well, we don't want to spread disinformation. Let us make that decision, But to a halfway awake person, they just keep showing their hands.
Yeah, and the halfway awake people are getting more awake. And, the people, even the people who you thought could never be awakened are starting to be. And as you say, it's, the more the more desperate they get, the more they expose their hand. And I mean, there's going to be a good half of the people, if not more, maybe 2/3, who are just, the word sheeple was created for these folks, and they don't want to know. They'll bury their heads in their sand. They'll go to fear as the first response. And, it's, oh, God bless Dr. Fauci and that good Bill Gates for showing us the way to a brighter and safer future. Those folks, we're not going to touch. But in the meantime, those are never the folks who changed history. Those are never the folks who caused progress for human beings, greater freedom, uh, less suffering, you know, abundance, joy, peace, all the good stuff. That was not ever in history led by the timid folks who bury their heads in the sand and, will do what Big Brother tells them. But it does feel like it's reached a critical point where there are so many people awake now, you know, 5-10% probably could have done it. It's probably more like 20. What's your sense?
Oh, I think they're waking up all over the place. But I've got an interesting. It's kind of like gotten into my head, okay? Because I'm looking at the scenario with the rioting, particularly the ones that, are well, all of the major rioting areas are under Democratic control. So you got Democratic mayors, you got Democratic governors, and they're not allowing Trump to come in and save their cities. Okay, so I just it doesn't make any sense to me that if this was all a democratic scenario, how do you think this is going to work out? You think that you're not letting Trump in so you won't make Trump look good? Well, you're looking so bad that people in droves are leaving the Democratic Party. They're scared to death that you're going to let it happen to their place. Okay? Now, this doesn't make strategic sense that you would think you could win anything from this. Now, here's another part of it, though. What if they are not thinking correctly to begin with? What if they're all being programmed?
Well,
Because do you think that this makes any sense to you?
well, I'm remembering as I'm listening, Nancy, you talking about, well, hey, you're wondering about dysfunction and gridlock on Capitol Hill. Well, guess what? Capitol Hill and the Capitol building is, high densification areas. These people's brains are fried, to say nothing of the fact that, the systemic corruption, campaign, contributions controlling, you go back to the Princeton University nonpartisan study, which concluded that the United States is not a democracy and hasn't been for a long time, that the actual will of the people has a negligible impact on policy. It's a plutocracy. It's controlled by the wealthy. It's controlled by the contributors who control whether or not the representatives get reelected. The representatives respond to that pressure. There's the massive lobbying reality. And so democracy ain't happening in this country. And you get 5G densification through every square foot of the government buildings. And those, what conscience and heart and higher vibration those folks possess as just, basically decent human beings who ended up in politics, God help them, that's likely to be suppressed. So it's pretty dicey. Yeah. But, in terms of the Democratic controlled cities, when you look at the question you're asking, well, don't they realize that this is strategically backfiring? Okay, if you go with the idea, as I'm willing to do, that the DNC is probably the main focus of what we'll call cabal, control, and corruption in the U.S. government right now. The Republican side is just as dirty. They just don't happen to me, have the, what you might call the command and control centers from the puppeteers and the puppeteers above the puppeteers. But when I look at what's happening, when I think of, okay, how many people are awake? How many people genuinely want to restore the republic? How many people know that the government's been bought and sold? How many people are willing to take action? How many people are, not just turning to Big Brother in fear? Well, if you're going to make a political divide on that, I'd say that most of those folks, those republic restoring, aware of the pedophile networks folks, fall into the progressive and Republican and QAnon camps. That's where most of those folks are. You know, when I talk to people, you know, you're listening to a former, you know, Chicago liberal Democrat. That was my heritage, is what I grew up in. And so, you know, most of the folks, and then I spent 25 years in LA. So, you know, most of my friends, you know, there's just been this growing gap between me and them as I've woken up to what goes on in the world. I'm saying, hey, this isn't political. You need to wake up. You need to realize who Bill and Hillary Clinton are, and, you know, who Soros is, and who George Bush is, and the Bush family, and the, you know, all of it. Um, it's just amazing to me how many of them are just knee jerk, you know, followers of the DNC line. They're like, "Oh, Kamala Harris, we're saved," you know, and I'm rolling my eyes, and to say nothing of Joe Biden, if he even makes it to November, let alone January, in terms of his cognitive impairment. Um, so I try not to get into, you know, the right, left, red, blue, Republican, Democrat, where are the good guys, where are the bad guys. But when you look at this question of these Democratic-controlled cities being the ones where they're keeping, you know, a federal solution out, and demonizing Trump, and letting, you know, their police departments get defunded, and meanwhile it's chaos. Um, the DNC may think that works for them, and maybe in the bigger picture, chaos at the upper cabal levels, you know, that's their motto: out of chaos, order. They create the chaos, and they've got the order ready in the wings to impose on us for the further suppression of our freedoms. So, yeah, it's kind of that picture. Does that make sense?
Well, we've got two explanations of it. Okay. Okay, well, three actually. They could simply be brain dead and not being able to react to anything, because, I mean, it's their inability to act that's really causing everything to get worse and worse. But let's assume that they're really more controlled. And I'm just talking about the individual people trying to make these decisions, like the mayors and the governors. Now, they happen to be Democratic. They're Democratic cities. So there is an underlying threat that, if you listen to enough of the presentation by Democrats, particularly Biden, and I don't think he knows what he's saying, it's not only just an implied threat, but it's being sort of nudged that if you vote for Trump, this is what your future is. You vote for Biden, and we'll stop. All right? Now, most anybody that looks at this kind of a situation from a historical standpoint knows that that's BS. But so many times people have given up and made very bad agreements with the thought that they could trust the opponent. And that, oh, okay, well, we'll put down our arms as long as you don't kill us. You know, that type of thing.
Right.
You know, so there is that. Maybe that's what they're after. They don't care that they're tearing the things. It's actually a threat to the rest of us. Or another option. Remember, I'm storytelling, people. Storytelling. I'm not telling you this is true. I'm just storytelling. But there's another option that if I know it's possible to do this, then certainly the patriots know it's possible to do this. Now, how do you make a population so afraid of the option of Democrat is much, much less appealing than Trump? Well, make the Democrats look crazy and burn their cities. Maybe it's the patriots that have got them into a non-compute state that they can't even make a decision. We don't know, but I do know one thing. It's happening.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I tend to think it's a combination: competing agendas, competing strategy, competing tactics, or, you know, Antifa on one hand, and then You've got some extremists at the other end, of course, too. There's always extremists. Which of them are paid agitators? Which of them are true believers on both sides? It's always hard to figure out. But I think things are so chaotic now that the idea that anybody is actually in command and control in some kind of centralized command and chain of command, as you would know as a military person, where an order is given and it's effectively carried out. Is it that kind of efficient soldiery out there and chain of command such that, like, okay, we'll go with this scenario, Soros or somebody says, I think we need some more Antifa agitation in Seattle. Yeah, and so let's send 10 units out there. Now, maybe that happens, but at the same time, it's like with 9/11 and the other. When I was a 9/11 denier, and I was a passionate 9/11 denier, in terms of 9/11 truth in the beginning, because I just couldn't go there. And I wanted somebody to show me evidence that my intelligence could not refute. And eventually somebody did. But in the meantime, a friend of mine, very well informed, who was trying to shed some light for me, and I'm saying, yeah, well, come on. And what you're saying that there isn't Al Qaeda, you're saying that there isn't Bin Laden, you're saying that there aren't. He said, no. Of course. And those aren't all CIA operatives, but the CIA operatives and their controllers know how to stir that hornet's nest for their own benefit. And so, stirring the hornet's nest in Portland, the chaos, it's not command and controlled, down the line execution of specific orders. It's just, let's just stir the hornet's nest, because the more people are afraid, and it's like, who's gonna carry the law and order message? Who's gonna? I am the solution to peace in our city streets. Is it going to be Biden or Trump? They're both. I mean, but it was funny because you pointed this out at the Democratic convention. They didn't mention a single thing about the frickin' chaos in the streets, and which is
Yes, and now
that's
they're
a spectacular omission.
and now they're blaming Trump. And as was pointed out by a number of people, well, if they thought Trump was responsible, why wouldn't they have been screaming about it at the convention? Trump became the fall guy when they had to start talking about it. And you know how that it's well. Did we talk about it on this show? Where no, we didn't. C-SPAN. I never look at it, but apparently they've got the ability to take in telephone calls or texting, or you can vote for whoever, right? Well, they got such an immense amount of people coming in to try to connect with them that they had to change some of the way that they were operating. And the vast majority of people coming in, and this all happened as the Republican Party was having their convention. And there were a massive amount of people identifying themselves as Democrats who said they were voting for Trump. And it was because they had watched the Democratic convention. And it was full of doom and gloom, and they never once talked about the riots in the street. That was the number one thing that they were concerned about that made them go with Trump, because the Republicans were talking about the discord in the streets, the rioting, and they were talking about hope, and they were talking about patriotism, and they were bringing in people to give good stories about Donald Trump. Okay, so all of a sudden, Trump, who they were diehard Democrats. I mean, there's apparently a voice call from this one woman who was explaining she had always been a Democrat, and now she had seen this Republican Party, and she was full of anguish, because she realized that the party, I mean, this is more, in many cases, it's like a religion, not spirituality, but a religion, that the Democrats are always right, the Republicans are always right. I mean, you grow up under that environment. I was lucky. My dad was a Republican, my mother was a Democrat. We got both sides of the story. So, and they didn't really talk politics. But what I'm saying here is that you've got a lot of people out there who have grown up in that Democratic Party. I'm a Democrat. I am not a Republican. I could not be a Republican as the philosophy of the old Republican Party was. It didn't match anything that I know. But Trump has got his own party. That's not the Republican Party anymore. And that's anybody that's just knows a little bit about it. It's not. They're not even talking Republican concepts. Do you know that this man is so astute to the critical situation that essentially starts with the incandescent light bulb? When they banned the incandescent light bulb, do you know that he said we can bring them back? He made them legal again. Incandescent lights. If he knows about incandescent lights and why we need them, and did it, and nobody talks about it, whoa, that's impressive.
That's the first I've heard. I didn't even know they'd been banned.
Yeah, and now, and another thing, did you know that under President Trump, that deep sea drilling in the Gulf of Mexico has been stopped, and that he just renewed the ban on it, so that off the west coast of Florida, you can't put any drilling rigs. And now he's expanded it to include the entire east coast of Florida, all the way up through Georgia, South Carolina, and I think by the time you get to North Carolina, you really don't have the ability to make some of those. I don't know why it was stopped at the North Carolina, South Carolina border, but he signed it yesterday, an extension and expansion of the bans on deep sea wells.
Well, that's certainly not the usual public impression of the policies of the Republican Party in terms of environmental issues. But
exactly.
Yeah.
Let me give you another example of things that I didn't know, and he did a speech here in Florida yesterday. I had no concept of this. Let me tell you a story. In the middle of the state, if you look at a Florida map, you'll see this big body of water. That's Lake Okeechobee. Lake Okeechobee is so critical to the water. South Florida has a water flooding problem. Lake Okeechobee is part of the control of the flooding, but also a way of increasing and protecting our supply of water, because it actually feeds the aquifer. The aquifer is carved out of the limestone that the state of Florida is made from, and when it fills up with water, then Lake Okeechobee will be up. But if it's going down, and Lake Okeechobee is also filling it, so it's that kind of thing, because we're getting rain in the wet lake, okay? Well, 3 times the lake got so filled that it was not just in being close to overflowing the dam, but the dam is so old that they were warning people, alternative people, I don't know who in the government, probably the government knew too, but they were, the Army Corps of Engineers were very, very concerned about it, because they thought there was a high possibility of it failing. Well, the first dam failed in 1921. And when it let go, I don't remember how many people died. I don't even know if they know, because it was 1921. They don't have the number counting ability they have now. But it flooded out just, oh my God, a huge amount of area. And that was with very few people. Now they're talking that 20, 30,000 people are going to be dead if this thing breaks.
How likely is it it'll break?
Oh, they were very scared of it. However, we don't have to worry about it, because President Trump fixed it. Okay? Nobody told me about this. I didn't know I didn't have to keep worrying about Okeechobee. He's really interesting when he's telling these amazing, oh my God, Okeechobee, I don't have to worry about Okeechobee drowning half the state. It's like he says these things, and he turns to the governor and he says, yeah, they told you to never get it done, huh? They told you it was too much money, huh? We got it done, didn't we? But nobody told me.
Well, that's because I mean, the obviously the media bias is, huge. We know that, but also I just wish he was better at getting his messaging out if these things are happening. He's got his own style, and it's not. I mean, he doesn't. If you think about the masters of communication in the White House, if you think about John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, the people who are known as, well, Ronald Reagan, the great communicator, right? you know, um, just to be able to walk into a press conference and say, hey, we just shut down the drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. Hey, by the way, we just saved, Okeechobee. Hey, there's this and this that happened. And now the media is obviously going to selectively highlight what they want to. The New York Times, all the news that's fit to print is actually all the news that fits the corporate agenda of the board of directors, who are controlled from where. But I just wish, because um, I hear what you're saying about the difference between the conventions. How did the Democrats forget, like, with the Iran hostage crisis going on and poor Jimmy Carter trying to, send in a special ops to rescue the hostages, and it ends in tragedy and disaster. And, then you got Ronald Reagan. It's morning in America, my friends, and he genuinely communicated a feeling of hope. Like you're saying, the Republican convention did much more effectively than the Democrats this summer. So I don't know. I know we're getting a little bit off track here, but it's I got a little bit into two scenarios at once there. What are you thinking, Nancy?
It I was pointing those things out not just because, and I agree with you. He's not. He does. I mean, why? I just don't understand why we don't know more of this stuff, because I listen to virtually every press conference he gives, and most of it is. I mean, it's like, put it on automatic. It's the same things. Maybe because the fact that the Everglades is under restoration, and then Okeechobee is fixed, and there's no oil going to be drilled on our offshore, our beaches. Maybe that's only, nobody cares except Florida. Well, Florida's a really important state, but you may not want to go out there politically and say, gee, I just took my home state and I just give them billions of dollars to fix all their problems, but I'm not going to give New York money.
Right, drop dead.
See what I'm saying? So I don't know how much of this is being done in the background, knowing that it's going to piss off a lot of people.
Well, there's an interesting story that happened the other day. Me and Eleni had dinner with a very remarkable man here in Colorado. He's very well known. His name's John Milton, and he is, if anybody could be called the founder of the environmental movement in America, it would be this man. And starting in the 1950s, I mean, he was doing, dozens and dozens and dozens of research papers and, government research that was starting to impact the understanding, the higher levels of government, of what, the costs to the environment was, what the damage was, what the long-term implications were, such that by the time the Nixon administration rolled around, because I asked him the question, we were having dinner, and I said, so, interesting question, how is it that the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, was instituted under Richard Nixon? How did that happen? Now I'm talking, he's a wonderful gentleman, very an amazing combination of deep scientific knowledge and spirituality and commitment. Just a wonderful man. And he said, well, I worked for the Nixon administration. I said, really? Because this is, not somebody you'd think of as a Republican. He said, well, no, I, was there at the creation of the EPA. And, and the understanding at the upper levels of government at that time of the economic benefits of, the long-term planning and of the solid science behind, the just the good sense of the environmental movement. And I remember, I was a teenager in the early 70s when the environmental consciousness was growing. Suddenly there's organic, food stores starting to pop up. And because my father was a holistic pediatrician, he and my mother got, totally into, okay, kids, no more Oreos and McDonald's. You're now going to eat, granola and yogurt. It was too late. Sorry, we still went out and got Oreos and McDonald's. But and then John said was, of course, that that's how the EPA came into being. He said, which of course is now been gutted by the Trump administration. So, there is, that reality. Trump has put into place in just about everywhere he could, when it comes to agencies that are supposed to protect the environment or labor or people's interests from, corporate greed, from, blatant roughshod riding over regulations, from, just what happens when unrestrained corporate greed is allowed to trample on various areas. And if you want an example, 70 years of Soviet totalitarianism devastated Russia, the Russian environment. Whole lakes disappeared. Areas became uninhabitable. I'm not talking about Chernobyl. So, it's the same thing anywhere. Unrestrained greed without, some kind of counterbalance. And the EPA, imperfect as it was, put in by a Republican administration, was that. And it's not just corporate media misrepresentation that it's been gutted by Mr. Trump. So believe me, I sure hope you're right. I would love to know more about genuine things he's done for the environment. And when it comes down to 5G, again, too, it's like, Trump is secretly working to prevent Huawei from taking over, and he's going to change the frequency to a healthy frequency. And he's like, okay, and it's the, what was it? Covfefe turns out to be, a secret mineral formula that is going to save us all from 5G. Well, I so hope that's happening, and I just wish he were much better at letting us know it's happening if it is. You know what I mean?
Well, how many people would believe it? I remember talking to a Native American who had met with Trump supporters up when the Dakota pipeline protest was ongoing, and they talked to one of his staff. I think it was his daughter, and the message given by the president is, I don't remember exactly the terms he used, but essentially he was like, I can only do certain things right now. And so that's because, in the fracking question, is fracking bad? Yes. But is fracking worse than having another Deep Horizon situation occur in the Gulf of Mexico? That's still perking. That's still a problem. So there's certain things that you can pick your fight and have a chance of winning and taking out the threat of the oil rigs in the ocean, with the detriment that fracking is doing to Pennsylvania and Dakotas and some of the other areas that it is. It might be a trade-off, because I'm firmly convinced that this man knows the same things I know concerning the ability to get free energy, the Tesla technology. And when I keep going back to when he did his presidential speech in front of the Common, and he's talking to this million people there, and he said to them, there are things out there that are coming that will just revolutionize everything we know. And he was talking about technology. So to let the fracking go in order to build an economy where you are economically free of the people that have got your oil in the very essence of how you do business, to be able to be free to do that, and not have the dangers of something that is so catastrophic environmentally. It's a trade-off, and I just feel that we haven't seen the final act, Michael.
I hear you. Yeah, I mean, it comes down to the fact that politics is the art of the possible, and presidential power is limited, which is good. It's good that we at least are still in name a democracy. We still have the outer forms of it, even though it's been totally corrupted and co-opted and sold. I seem to recall a story of Franklin Roosevelt with people coming to him and saying, Mr. President, you need to understand what's happening in Europe to the Jewish people. You need to understand the reality, in the camps and what's happening, and to be able to take action of some kind, to allow more refugees in or to institute some program. And Roosevelt said, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, he said, I hear you, but for me to be able to take meaningful action, you have to create political pressure on me, because there's Congress and there's the military, and I'm not a dictator, and you need to go out and create sufficient political pressure on me such that, in the whole complex of this legislative faction and that and this piece we're trying to put through, and is it a trade-off? Like you're saying, is it a trade-off? It's like, oh, Mr. President, so you want to vote on this bill to support a refugee program for Jewish refugees? Well, okay, for my constituency, I'm going to need a trade-off on this other big piece of legislation over here for a dam in Albany. I mean, it comes down to that kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's like, what can he do? People accuse Trump of being, of wanting to be an authoritarian dictator. He probably does. I mean, most presidents do at a certain point that gets frustrated, and he certainly kind of has that personality profile. But he's not yet. We still have enough remnants of democracy in the country. But what it really is, he's not being constrained by remnants of authentic democracy. He's being constrained by those sections of Congress and the media and all the rest of it that are part of the cabal, the deep state, the shadow government, the corrupt financial elite, whatever you want to call them. So yeah, maybe it does just come down to, as you're saying, it's about, okay, I could fight the anti-fracking fight, or I can fight the clean up the Gulf fight, or I can fight the, let's limit oil drilling off of the southeast coast. But I can't fight them all at once. So whatever trade-off allows free energy to be implemented at some point, take the legs out from under the fossil fuel industry. Gosh, I hope that's his long-term scenario. And I sure hope that he knows the truth about 5G. I haven't seen it yet.
Well, just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean.
Well, no, if you've seen it, I'd love to hear about it, because
well, I've seen it in the actions he's taken directly to curtail 5G because of the limitations he's put on of taking in China equipment, and the equipment is for 5G in the way that we initially began to explain it to people, it's all Chinese.
Right.
You know, um, the basic thing about Donald Trump is he was an outsider, but he's also a businessman. And I was listening to somebody that had been with him for many. He was like the assistant national security, whatever. Been traveled all over with him, and he was talking about a meeting that he had with some generals in overseas Afghanistan, or maybe Iraq. No, I think it was Afghanistan. And so the generals come in and they say, "Sir, we need this, this, and this." And the man says, they'd always come in. He said they seem to have always been used to presenting something and getting a signature, and then great job, everybody goes home. But instead, the president started asking questions, and the man talking says, and you could see that these generals were dumbfounded by the question, the fact that he had actually asked the question. Never mind the fact that they couldn't answer the question. And the guy said, so it wasn't a short meeting. It got longer and longer and longer. And then finally, Trump said to them, "Why don't you come back to me when you can answer the questions that I asked you today?" All right. So you've got somebody from the outside, and everybody who's been real close to him, he tends to, and he says it himself, America first. He says, they want me to do this, this, and this, and I look at him and I say, America first. And so when he goes into any of these negotiations, he's not looking at it as I'm following the leader. He goes into it as a businessman that sits down and says, what's in it for me and my people?
Right.
And yes, I could easily argue that the things that he does are, very, signs of a very dangerous man who could take over this country. But at the same time that you can look at those things, you hear somebody that is continually talking about God. All right, if you don't listen to the man, you don't know how many references he makes to God. And you watch him interact with people. And people who really had Trump dysfunction would... I remember Scott, was cartoon guy. I think his last name is Scott. But he went in to meet the president, and he said, I brought this up on the show before, that when Trump was talking to him, he felt like he was the only man in the world. That's how much focus that Trump was making with him. And so he makes personal connections with people that don't seem to be dependent on politics. Now, the ones he doesn't like, they probably feel that just as much as the ones he does like. There's a lot of people that are, saying a lot of bad things about him. And, reality is what you think it is. If you think you heard that, maybe in your reality it's true. But certainly it wasn't meant by the president that way, nor probably even said by the president. People are weird when they start to use memories, because a lot of times it's tainted by your opinion of the man.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I didn't hear it, but he must have said it, your brain says.
Yeah, because this is who he is. We all know that, right?
Right.
Yeah, and, a lot of people talk about God and do it in a way to, manipulate people or make people think they're real spiritual. And I get a little nervous around people who talk about God too much. It's one thing. And some of the most spiritual people I've known, and authentic, deep, real, loving, wise, God-loving people, were completely unabashed about talking about their faith, talking about the reality of God in their lives. And yet it's not like they're wearing it on their sleeve all the time, So I've had no personal experience of the man. Has he been a spiritually oriented person for most of his life? Well, there's not a whole lot of evidence of it, but moving into that position can kind of, be a kick in the pants spiritual evolutionary impact. To go, holy Toledo, I'm now actually responsible for potential impact for good or bad on millions of people and to some extent the world. That could turn
Okay,
into
well,
God.
well, he said he doesn't say God all the time, but he says it. God bless America. It's within the context of something that makes sense that you would invoke the image of God. As far as the spirituality, and I'm talking spirituality versus religion. His pastor was Norman Vincent Peale. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, yeah. And what was the? I mean, it was Peale that began to, let's say, promote the concept of reality is what you think it is.
Yeah,
So if you're a kid and you're growing up with the guy on the pulpit at the church telling you that if you can conceive it, you can make it real. Now,
yeah.
what's this kid going to grow up like? He's going to think, geez, if I want to do that, let's just do it. And so that's how he acts. That's what happens. And people say, oh, you're a narcissist. No, he's following a philosophy of if you can conceive it, you can make it real.
Well,
It,
yeah. I mean certainly what I grew up with. My parents, I got 10 kids in my family, and starting in the early 70s, my parents put us all through the Silva Mind seminars about, how to um, program your own self for your own destiny and goals, and how to access clairvoyance and self-diagnosis and self-anesthesia just through the power of the mind, how to protect yourself against, anyone trying to control you. It was very much about, it's called Silva Mind Control, but it was really about control of your own mind. And so, yeah, that's what made me the man I am today.
and I believe that that's what's happening. I think that now you're also hearing the term Great Awakening. I think the Great Awakening is the Great Awakening to the powers of the human mind and the human spirit. And, so who better to lead the country than a businessman who looks at everything from a business standpoint? He makes decisions on what am I getting out of this? Now, is that wrong? No, because if you're the person that's saying, what am I getting out of this? And you are firmly a compassionate individual that says, look at all this money I just got us, and then he gives it away. Okay? That's a totally different type of person. And my feeling is that is Donald Trump.
Well, with this thing about the article in the Atlantic where he's saying these things about the soldiers, I think he actually said those things with, the context and the number of other military people who have heard him, say, "Hey, what kind of money are you getting for, having those soldiers over there? What's in it for them?" That for him to look at a grave of a soldier who died for his country and to say, "I don't get it. What was in it for him?" From that point of view.
No,
Now, for
listen,
military
no. I'm not gonna go there. He didn't say that way in any way, shape, or form that way. He's got people that were there that said no, it never happened, and you've got an anonymous person who said it. Well, get the anonymous person to stand up and tell me that he heard him say it there.
Okay.
I mean, this is just all bullshit. But we're also at the end of the end of the show.
All right, well, I don't want to close on a notion of disharmony. I'm glad you're bringing that out. I'd be glad to hear the other side. But just in terms of this, business-like approach to the military, I think that's probably where whatever semblance or version of that got distorted by some anonymous person who's not willing to stand up and have the guts to attach their name to some accusation. I once talked to a minister at my temple, and he had received some note from somebody about, hey, Michael Dunn did this or did that. And he brought me into his office and said, Michael, you see this complaint against you? I said, yeah. He said, do you see a name at the bottom of it? I said, no. You want to know where it goes, Michael? I said, sure. Right over here. And he crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. That's where things that people aren't willing to stand up and put their names behind. should go. So I'm with you.
Okay, everybody out in Radio Land, we're leaving you.
Yeah, thanks for being with us. Radio 5G, a joint project of Cosmic Reality Radio and the Sacred Alliance of Global Evolution in Colorado. God bless us, everyone. Thanks for being with us, folks. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. May it be.
Let it